Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And have we got an interesting one for you today? Do please stay with us up to the end because you're going to be very surprised where this one goes. It's called The Lost Tribes of Israel, The Great Escape. And you're going to learn things here that you won't have seen anywhere else, I promise you. We're going to go into this in depth and we're going to dig hard. And we're going to, as before, we're going to be looking at the ancient texts, the Assyrian records, but we're also going to be looking at other things. I'm following up with these lost tribes in the Assyrian archives by William, I think it's William, W.E. Filmer anyway, and he's also got another little book that was published, which actually doesn't have some of the detail that's in the little leaflets, but it has other things. It gives a more comprehensive view in some ways and some nice diagrams. So we're going to use this information. He obviously was a very intelligent man. I have a lot of respect for this guy. He really dug deep, and he went to first sources wherever he could. So it's worth hearing what he has to say because it's quite at odds with what you'll see on Wikipedia or read in many so-called history books, which are actually, all history books are to some extent imagination. None of history has told to us everything that we would like to know. The historian has to assess and pull things together and create a narrative that seems to hold together as best he can. And mistakes can be made. So we're going to look into this. We're going to look at it from the point of view of William Filmer and what he had to say about this whole subject. So without more ado, let's press on. Right, now the first 10 kings of 10 tribes northern Israel were as follows. We did this before. There was Jeroboam. He was the founder of the dynasty after the split with Judah. The kingdom of Israel split into two parts. You had 10 tribes in the north, mainly in the north, and you had the two tribes who made up the kingdom of Judah, or the Jews as we would call them now. Then he was followed by Nadab, Bashur, Allah, Zimri, and then we come to an important figure called Omri, who ruled over this 10-tribed Israel from 885 till 874, so it's 11 years. And he's important because he founded the city of Samaria, which became the capital of this Israel. And the tribes of Israel came to be called the people of Omri by the Assyrians. We'll come to that in a minute. He had an awful son called Ahab. Ahab, not the same Ahab who was, chasing white whales, but a different Ahab. And Ahab was married to Jezebel, this awful witch who was persecuting the prophets. And we talked about their story before, so I won't go into it here. Then we have Ahaziah, Joram, and then Jehu, who's named on the black obelisk as paying tribute to Shalmaneser. I'll come back to that. So looking at this list of kings, the ones I want to draw your attention to are Omri and Jehu. Omri, because he was the founder of the city of Samaria, which became the capital, and he's important to us because the Assyrians began to call the people of Israel, they didn't call them Israel, they called them the Bit Omri or Bit Gomri, the people of Omri. So they looked upon Omri as the founder of the nation because he founded Samaria. He's an important guy. They didn't know about previous things that gone on before. So we had then Jehu, who's named on the black obelisk. We saw him in the last episode. Now, over the course of the next 150 years, the Assyrian Empire would grow to include most of what is now eastern Turkey, parts of Iran, the Levant, that's includes Israel and Lebanon, and going up to the sort of shoulder of Turkey and down to the border of Egypt. That's all called the Levant. And they controlled Jordan and even Egypt. So they had this massive empire stretching throughout the Middle East, much of the Middle East as we would call it today. And the Bible tells us how there was a succession of deportations of first Israel and later most of Judah. So first of all, this northern kingdom, Israel, was taken away. And then later on, they took most of the Jews away, except those who were still in Jerusalem. And those ones in Jerusalem were eventually taken to Babylon. And we get the story about the Babylon, imprisonment in Babylon and wailing at the waters, and eventually being allowed to return when the Persians took over. So we've covered that in the previous episode, but what I want to look at now is what happened to these people who've been deported by the Assyrians. Where did they go and what happened to them? Now, under Sargon II, who was a king of Assyria around about 722, the Israelites were mostly deported to Media, swapping places with tribes of Medes who were moved to Samaria. And these latter would become the Samaritans of later times. So you have to understand that what the Assyrians liked to do was when they conquered a territory, they would deport the people from there to somewhere else, and they would move other people from another territory into the previous one. They did that for a variety of reasons, but mainly because they wanted to stop the people feeling so possessive about the land and take away their fighting spirit. Because, it's not where our forefathers are buried. It's not our ancestral homeland. We may as well stay here and just get on with what the Assyrians tell us to do. That was the attitude, I think. It's a very cruel thing to do, but that's what they practiced, and it wasn't just the Israelites who were transferred that way. They did that all over their empire. And the Assyrians knew the Israelites by a different name. I said that just now. They call them the Bit Humria, meaning the house of Omri. And as far as the Assyrians were concerned, he was the father of the nation. And so this Israel was his house, meaning they were his people. So you have to understand, when we talk about a tribe or a nation, and we say someone's its father, it doesn't mean that person, if you go back enough generations, you'll find they were the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of everyone in that nation. No, he would have been of the royal family of that nation or that tribe, but there are obviously a lot of other people associated with the tribe as well. There were the servants, there were the slaves, there were the people who came and joined them voluntarily, people who married into the tribe. All these other people, and you had that right at the beginning when you talk about Abraham and his people. He had hundreds of people, thousands at times, who were his tribe, but that didn't mean he was the father of them all. He wasn't. He only had two legitimate sons. I think he had some other ones who weren't legitimate. But the tribe was much bigger than just the royal house after whom it's named. So Omri was the sort of father of the Samaritans, and that was what interested the Syrians, because they had sieged Samaria for 3 years before they conquered it and took those people away as well. So they regarded them as being the Bit Omri, the people of Omri. Now then, the spelling here is very interesting, and you have to go into looking at the actual Hebrew letters to see what's going on. We write his name as Omri, and if you read your Bible, you'll find Omri there. But the name begins with the letter Ayin, which to us looks like a Y, sort of slightly flammy Y, and they read from right to left. So the first letter on the right in the Hebrew is this letter Ayin. And you notice also that the word Gomorrah also starts with Ayin. And actually it's the first three letters are exactly the same as you had with Omri. So why don't we call this Omra? You know, we don't, do we? We call it Gomorrah. And so Omri, we should probably think of that Ayin as not being totally silent. So we have it here, the Omri, the same first three letters as in Gomorrah. And the letter Ayin is silent in modern Hebrew, but represents a guttural. In ancient times, this was pronounced as an H or GH or KH. Now, what that means is it's difficult for me to say because I'm British. We tend to talk very much with our front part of our mouths and, labials and dentals. We don't use the back of the throat sound very much, but in other languages they do. And certainly in this, it would be Omri, something more like that. And that goh could be written down as in more modern writing as a G or GH, KH or K. So you get all these different versions of the people of Omri. It becomes a Comri or the Gomri or Gumri. It's written in different ways, and it's complicated further because in these ancient languages, they didn't used to write vowels. They would know what vowels to use because they were speaking it all the time. But when we read it, we don't know the vowels they were using. It's the same with Egyptian, actually, ancient Egyptian. When they try to interpret hieroglyphs in Egyptian, they put an E in for each vowel when they don't know it. So you get all these E sounds in Egyptian, but that's just a modern thing so that we can sort of speak it. But that's not necessarily how they would have pronounced it at all. And it's the same with this Ayin. It would be more like sound. So Comri, and that could easily become the Comri, the people of Omri. Now, further research reveals that 50 years after the Gomri or Cymri were relocated to other parts of the Assyrian Empire, they were known as the Gamir or Gamri. So again, we've got this G sound, Gamri or Gamria. So it's difficult for us to actually pronounce it because we don't know exactly how they were pronouncing the cuneiform writing. We can translate the letters, but how they interpret those letters when they're speaking the language can vary. And actually you see that even with more modern languages like Welsh, you find there's all sorts of different writings for the same name. People used to write things as they spoke them. And one person might speak one way, but someone else might have a different accent and write something that looks rather different with their accent. They didn't have a dictionary like we would have to give them a standard spelling. So this would be the same thing with these people recording the records in the Assyrian archives. The Cymri could become the Gumri or Gamri at other times. The same people, but spelt differently in their archives. So a people of this name, that's the Gamri of this name, make their first appearance in history at precisely this time. That's when the people have been moved away from Israel and taken captive to parts of Syria and Assyria and into parts of Media, which was bordering onto there near the Caspian Sea. So anyway, the very places where the Israelites were taken to, we have this sudden appearance of these Gumri or Gamir people. We'll be coming to that in a minute, but those people later on they're known as the chimerioi by the Greeks, which we translate as chimerians. And so the chimerians, and we're misled to think that these chimerians must have come from Central Asia, moving westwards, these invading horsemen moving westward. Well, the ancient Israelites had horses too, you know, and they had chariots, and they had all sorts of stuff, fighting stuff. They're very warlike. So we don't have to import horsemen and archers. They were archers as well. We don't have to import these horsemen from the steppes of Russia to explain the presence of the Gumri, who become the Chimerians in Anatolia. We're looking at the people of Israel. When we'll press on, you'll see how that works out when we look at the archives. Now, the people the Assyrians called Gumri, or Gumri, were known by the Greeks by the name Chimerioi, or Chimerians. And writing in the 5th century BC, so that's the 400s BC, and that's long after the events. We were talking about events in, the first, they'd taken that in 722. This is, hundreds of years earlier. But writing in the 5th century BC, and so long after the events he describes, Herodotus reasoned that that's the Chimerians, were nomadic invaders of Asia Minor, i.e. Anatolia. Asia Minor is Anatolia, the biggest part of Turkey, Asiatic Turkey, who had been driven out of their homelands. That's what he thinks. And Herodotus first mentions the Chimerians as having invaded and taken over Sardis, the capital of Lydia, during the reign of King Ardys. So this is what he actually writes, and I've copied that from his book. And now I will speak of Ardys, the son of Gargis, who became king of Lydia after Gargis. He took Priene, that's Ardys, and made an invasion against Miletos. Now, Priene and Miletos, the two coastal cities, Greek cities of the Dodecapolis, the Ionian cities on the coast of what's now Turkey. So he took Priene, invading Miletos. And while he is ruling over Sardis was the capital of Lydia, the Chimerians, driven from their abode by the nomad Scythians, so the Scythians, he believes, were these nomads from Central Asia, and the Chimerians are kind of other nomads, and they're driving them westwards. By the nomad Scythians, came to Asia, and what he calls Asia is Anatolia, and took Sardis, except the citadel. So there's no doubt about this, the Chimerians sacked Sardis, but they didn't get the citadel. So here we can see in this diagram, Lydia is at its largest extent. It was taking up most of western Turkey, as we would call it now, and Sardis was its capital. So you can see that there, roughly where that would have been. So these Chimerians, coming from somewhere in the east, had actually sacked the city of Sardis. These horsemen of the apocalypse. The apocalypse where Sardis is concerned, anyway. Now, going back a step, we met Gargis before in my lectures. He was the servant of King Cadaulis, who showed off his naked wife to Gargis, with the latter hiding behind a curtain. And you can just see it in this picture, where he's hiding behind the curtain there, peeping Tom, because Cadaulis was very proud of his wife, and he wanted to show off how beautiful she was, boasting about her. But she knew what had happened. She caught a glimpse of this Gargis hiding there. And later on, she gave Gargis an ultimatum. Either she would expose him, how dare he see the queen naked like this? Her husband would have to do something about that, and he'd put him to death. She would expose him, or he must kill the king first and marry her. And Goggies did the latter. He killed the king and so usurped the throne of Lydia, and he married the wife. So that's this whole story. We raised this before because we have this whole prophecy about Gog of Magog, and I explained to you in an earlier lecture on the book of Revelation how Gog is a play on the name of Gog, or Goggies. The ES on the name is a Greek ending, so you can decline it, but his name would be Gog. And he's used as the archetype of a usurping king of that part of Turkey, symbolizing a ruler of Turkey in more modern times, Gog of Magog. Anyway, he was king of Lydia with its capital at Sardis from 680 to 645. Now, Herodotus does not seem to have known that the Cimmerians were active in western Anatolia even during the reign of Goggies himself. So he's looking at, I think it's the grandson of Goggies, he's looking at, but the Assyrian archives tell us about involvement between Goggies, who they call Gogu in Assyrian tongue, had appealed to them for help to deal with the Cimmerians during his reign. So we have the story here. In 665 BC, Lydia was threatened with invasion by the Cimmerians. So way before the other invasion where they sacked Sardis, Goggies had a dream that he should appeal for assistance to Assurbanipal, the son of Esarhaddon and the current king of Assyria. Accordingly, he sent gifts and an embassy to Nineveh, that's Goggies. And this city was the equivalent of modern-day Mosul. Yeah, it was the capital. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, but its location was where modern-day Mosul is. It's on the outskirts of Mosul, the ruins of it, that is. It was a long way from Lydia. It's a very long way from Mosul to the sort of coastlands of western Turkey. So as far as the Assyrians are concerned, that's a place far off. They don't really know much about that. It's the other side of the sea. The other side of the sea means the other side of the Mediterranean, away from the Syrian coast. You have to cross you could go around Anatolia all the way around, but also it's across the sea as far as they're concerned. And in the event, Goggies was able to defeat the Cimmerians on his own, and so didn't need Assyrian help. Instead, he sent prisoners, that's Cimmerian prisoners, to Nineveh. And Assurbanipal records the incident in his annals, and Assurbanipal is the one whose libraries that we have got. So in his writings, Assurbanipal writes, Goggies had a vision saying, lay hold of the feet of Assurbanipal, that means give homage to Assurbanipal, the king of Assyria, and conquer thy foes by calling upon his name. So this dream, this is what Assurbanipal is interpreting the dream as. He's been told, must do obeisance to Assurbanipal and then he'll be looked after. On the day that he beheld this vision, he dispatched his messenger to bring greetings to me. The Cimmerians, a wicked foe, who did not fear my fathers and had not even laid hold of my royal feet. So these Cimmerians, they're not doing the right thing. They're not holding his feet and begging him for protection and, here's some taxes, here's all our gold, look after us. He's not done that. They're wicked. And then there's a break. It says, with the aid of Ashur, that's the god of the Assyrians, is called Ashur. That's why they call his name Assurbanipal, or Assyria, the kingdom ruled by Ashur, their high god. And Marduk was the god of Babylon. So these two, Ashur and Marduk, my lords, he laid bonds and fetters upon them, and putting them into a cage, that's talking about these hostages he's sent, brought them before me, together with his rich gifts, that I might see his. And there's another, break. We got a better text from him. In this one, it tells us a bit clearer what was going on. Guggies, king of Lydia, a province on the other side of the sea, a distant region whose name the kings who went before me, my fathers, had not heard mentioned. So earlier Assyrians never heard of this place, Lydia, over the sea, it's miles away. But he's heard about them now. Ashur, the God who created me, revealed the honoured name of my majesty to him in a dream. So it's Ashur's done this. He's given this lowly king of Lydia, this Guggies, a dream, telling him to hold my feet and do homage, and my majesty. Lay hold of the feet of his highness Assurbanipal, king of Assyria, favourite of Ashur, king of the gods, lord of all, and revere his kingship. Employ the favour of his lordship as of one doing homage and paying tribute. Let thy prayers come to him. So Assurbanipal, in typically Assyrian way, he interprets everything, as him. It's all me. I've done it. I'm the good guy. I'm the one who's beloved of the gods, and all these peasants, I have to go and trample all over them and conquer their cities because they've insulted the gods, haven't they? And so I'm absolutely in the right doing all this. So we do get confirmation from the Assyrian archives about this event. Meanwhile, Herodotus believed that the Cimmerians came from southern Russia, driven out by the Scythians and migrating over the Caucasus to escape them. So he doesn't know anything about these writings about Cimmerians long before that. And this is, unfortunately, the contemporary view too. That's what you'll read in history books now. They've taken it from Herodotus, and everyone writes down, oh, well, he said that, it must be true. And so it's absorbed into the culture that there were these Cimmerians and the Scythians coming from far away in Russia and invading on their horsebacks with their bows and arrows and conquering and to conquer. Must have come from the Russian steppes as nomadic tribes, but that's not what the archives actually reveal to us when we go into them. So anyway, Herodotus writes, the nomad Scythians dwelling in Asia, being hard-pressed in war by the Massagetæ, so there's another bunch, left their abode and crossing the river Araxes, came towards the Cimmerian land. So the river Araxes runs towards the Caspian Sea from Armenia on Ararat, and it goes in a sort of easterly direction. So they've come from the steppes of Russia. They have to cross this river. They're going northwards now, in his interpretation, came towards the Cimmerian land. And the Cimmerians, when the Scythians were coming against them, made their way out from the land, and the Scythians found the land deserted of its inhabitants. And this actually makes no sense unless you assume that Herodotus was confusing the Araxes River with the River Don. I'll show you a diagram in a minute to explain this. This assumption is made by modern authors and commentators that he didn't know what he's talking about. It was really the River Don. He calls it the Araxes, but he didn't know what he's talking about. And commentators, but is contradicted by W.E. Filmer. He refers to this as a fake theory or false theory. It implies that the Cimmerians' land was originally Western Ukraine. Oh, that's a surprise. And the Scythians are supposed to have crossed the rivers Volga, Don and Dnieper. Well, we come across the Dnieper a lot, haven't we, in recent times, to reach this land. And the Cimmerians are supposed to have fled through Crimea, named after them, of course, crossed to the Kerch Peninsula, where that big bridge is that the Russians have, to Crimea from Russia, the Kerch Bridge. Well, there wasn't a bridge there at that time, but they could still cross over. There's only a narrow channel, and they could take boats and go across. Cimmerians crossed to the Kerch Peninsula, Then they went through the Caucasus to split into groups, one going into Anatolia and the other to Syria and Media. This is what's implied by him. So here we can see what he's talking about. And Filmer captions this as a false theory of historians to account for the appearance of Gamera in the two localities where the Israelites are known to have been in exile. This is the false theory, and he's now going to show us why that is false and what the truth really is. So in the last lecture we discussed how the Bible tells us in the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, the king of Assyria, i.e. Sargon, captured Samaria, and he carried the remaining Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Hala and on the Habor, the river of Gozen, and in the cities of the Medes. He tells us that very specifically. And we can see that those locations, the Hala and Habor river, around that area, the Gamera, the left-hand side ones, and the others, the cities of the Medes below Lake Umira, there. In Media extends to the southern Caspian Sea there. We must therefore ignore the false theory, so this is the false theory of the southern migration, that the Scythians drove the Cimmerians, the Gimera, out of Ukraine and forced them over the Caucasus and Araxes rivers to settle in parts of Assyria and Media. In fact, the Gamera were the lost tribes of Israel, who were settled in these locations by the Assyrians themselves. They're the Cymri, or the Gumri, and that becomes Gumri, becomes Gimera, or Gimir. It's slightly different. You would put different vowels in those places and sound the G a bit more, and the guttural sound. You go from the bit Omri to the Gumri, or Gumra. Not a strange idea at all. That's just how languages do develop and how people speak. Now, Filmer points out that the earliest documents we have referring to the Gimera are clay tablet letters sent to King Sargon II of Assyria by his spies. These were located on the border of his empire, the spies that is. The letters in question are about 20 from among 30,000 tablets that were recovered from the library of Assurbanipal by British archaeologist Austin Layard and his assistants in 1853. These tablets now reside in the British Museum. Now, unfortunately, these letters that he's talking about, 30,000 tablets, there's an awful lot of text, and they're not contained in these books. There's a separate, I think, 20 volumes of these letters that you can actually get hold of it. And I found these the picture of these volumes. There's only 4 of them for sale here, and those were about £350 to buy those 4, and you need 20 volumes. So it's running to thousands, and I haven't got that sort of money to spend on this, unfortunately. So I haven't been able to research this. Going to the actual text like I have with the other ones. But I'm going to tell you what Filmer had to say about this, and he quotes from a different source in the Cambridge Ancient Histories. You can buy those books, made books if you like, up to you. Anyway, the letters in question concern events between 707 to 706 BC. And this would have been at the end of the reign of Sargon II, right? That's the Sargon we're interested in, who ruled from 724 to 705 BC. And he was the great-grandfather of Assurbanipal. So Assurbanipal is the guy with the libraries. So these are texts that must have been passed down to Assurbanipal, coming from his great-grandfather. So they've been looked after and preserved and put in his library. and he was Sargon was responsible, as I said earlier, for the deportation of the majority of the Israelites from their homeland in Canaan to Media. Thus these letters, or spy reports, were written more than 40 years before Gagis made his appeal for help to Assurbanipal. So Assurbanipal, he's getting this embassy and nice presents from the king of Lydia, who's never heard of that place. It's over the sea somewhere, but hey, nice that they sent me gifts. Nice that he's had a dream, to ask me for help. Must be the gods who sent him that. And he sent me these horrible Cimmerians people who don't do me the honour they should. And he sent me these captives in cages that he's caught. But Herodotus was writing about 450 BC, so more than 250 years later. So he didn't know anything about these spy reports. He didn't know anything about this earlier event. If he had done, he might have thought rather differently about the whole situation. But he didn't. He didn't know about that. And it would appear that part of the reason Sargon had placed these lost tribes, the Israelites, where he did, was for them to form a buffer zone against the neighbouring empire of Urartu. So he wasn't necessarily putting them there because he thought they'd make good farmers for that bit of land. Anyway, he's pulled them out of their own homeland and stuck them there to unsettle them. But he's thinking, well, they can actually be buffer state for me. They have to do right by me, or worse things could happen to them. They know that. They're going to, look after my interests against Urartu, which is the empire north of Assyria, and a serious rival. So Urartu was a powerful empire that lay to the north of Assyria in what would later be called Armenia. So this is where we're talking about, this eastern part of Turkey around Mount Ararat and the hill country around there, what would become called Armenia later on. And it too was a very ancient kingdom, having grown from its centre in the Lake Van or Ararat region of what is now eastern Turkey. And Filmer quotes the Cambridge Ancient History. From a report of the Assyrian officer Assurbanipal, we learned that Argistis, king of Urartu, was engaged in 708 in collecting a considerable army, which it was supposed he intended to use against Assyria. The next spring, however, saw him otherwise engaged. The people called Gimere by the Assyrians, Kimerioi by the Greeks, were beginning to move into Asia Minor. Well, they were already there. Well, very close. They were in Media, and they were in northern Mesopotamia, very close to the part near the Euphrates River and the bits of the Tigris. These archives continue. These letters, these spy letters, continue, and we get reports about how the king is moving southwards. He's going to a place called Wasi, and then he's going on from there to Muzazir, and he's going to invade a territory of the Mane, which had been conquered earlier by the Assyrians. So the intelligence received from the spies informed the Assyrians that in autumn 708 BC, the Urartian army advanced to Wezi, a fortress that the Assyrians had captured from them in 714. So it's not that long before, that's 6 years. The next letter says that the Urartian king, with 3,000 troops, had crossed the Black River and had moved towards Muzazir, where they offered sacrifices. From there they proceeded to enter the province of Mane, which was adjacent to Media. So if you look at Wezi, the Black River is the Great Zab, a tributary of the Tigris, and they've crossed over that, and they're heading towards this place, Musasir, and they're going to Mane, which is to the south of Lake Umir. And the territory of the Mane had been in the Urartian Empire before that, but was conquered by Sargon in 719 BC. So, this is bits of the Urartian Empire that had been taken from them, and they want them back. So that's why this guy has brought his army together, and he's going down there to sort it all out. And he's, doing sacrifices and all the right things to get the gods on his side. So he pressed forwards. So Sargon's annals tell us how 2 years after he had deported the Israelites, there had been a rebellion of the Manaeans. So he'd conquered that place, and 2 years later there had been a rebellion. And in usual Assyrian fashion, Sargon smashed their cities. The people and their possessions are carried off. And you can read that in the Assyrian Archives, Volume 2, page 3. And Sargon tells us that he settled the Mane in Hatti. Hatti is the Assyrian name for the Hittite Empire, Hittite lands, which they had also conquered, that were a bit further west. And it was seen that the Israelites, the Gamera, perhaps voluntarily had moved from Media into the now empty land of the Mane. So the Israelites had been put there in 722 or 721. Then in 719, Sargon had gone there and taken the Mane out, and that left a sort of vacuum. And it looks like the Israelites, or the Gamera, had moved there into that, nice land that's been left behind by the Mane. Prefer to be there than in Media. However, the Urartians were intent on taking it back into their empire. They weren't going to have other people settling there without their permission and without paying them tribute, at least. They were going to take it back. So the next letter brought startling news. Evidently, the Urartian army had been routed in Mane by the Gamera. The king of Urartu had fled for the hills, while 9 of his generals had been killed and the commander-in-chief captured. So, major defeat for the Urartians at the hands of the Gamera, or Gimir, who were going to become the Chimerians. They thrashed them. And a further letter added that the Gamera had now moved out from Mane into Urartian territory itself. So, having defeated the army, they're now moving into Urartu and going up, probably all the way up to Lake Van. So the text tells us, the Gamera went forth out of the midst of the Mane into the land of Urartu. It seems, having defeated the Urartian army, they were keen to take advantage to escape from the Assyrians. Yeah, now they see a chance. Yeah, suddenly there's a gap they can escape through. Urartu itself was left much weakened, both by the failed attempt to conquer Mate and also from the invasion of the Gamera, the Cymry, who established themselves on the southern coast of the Black Sea. So they pass through Urartu and they go up to this area up on the southern side of the Black Sea, where later on, the Greeks would recognize that that's where the Chimerians come from. As Chimerians, they become well known to the Greeks and spread to the west of Anatolia, sacking first Gordion, the capital of Phrygia, and later Sardis, the capital of Lydia. Now then, 7 years later, is it 7 years? 7 years after 721, this would be a bit less than that, about 5 years, isn't it, from 719. And if we're talking about 718, it's about 4 years actually. Sargon invaded Urartu. Yeah, he's seen they're being defeated now, and they're much weakened. In his annals, he gives the usual description of cities razed to the ground, booty taken, and people deported. Urartu, which had been a rival empire, was absorbed for a time into the Assyrian Empire. Its people, now subjects, had to pay taxes and obey Sargon. So this has all gone horribly wrong for the Urartians. They perhaps should have left Mane alone, because it's weakened them and left them vulnerable now for conquest by Assyria. And Urartu was eventually absorbed into the Medo-Persian Empire. I should add that the Assyrian Empire itself hadn't got long. Danger was coming. Assurbanipal died nearly a century later. He's the last of the great kings of Assyria. He's the one whose library was excavated by Layard. So he was the last of the truly great kings of Assyria. 9 years after this, after he died, in 612 BC, Nineveh was sacked by a coalition of forces that included Babylonians, Medes, Persians, and Scythians. So Nineveh, the great capital of Assyria, that had dominated that part of the world for centuries, was, defeated and sacked. And it's time for revenge. All these people who had been oppressed by the Assyrians, they were going to take their revenge. For a short time, that's only a couple of years, the Assyrian Empire flickered on in the west with its regional capital of Haran. When this too was taken, it was the end of the Assyrian Empire. From its ashes would rise first the Babylonian and then the Medo-Persian empires. And we read a lot about these in the book of Daniel, as well as in certain of the apocryphal books. Book of Daniel, major prophetic book in the Old Testament, which you really should read. I've done 3 programs on that book, which are, I think, worth watching. But it's also a lot in the Apocrypha, these books like Judith and so on, and talking about life in Persian times. Now, the standard King James Bible is shorter in length than the Catholic Bible, which also contains the so-called Apocrypha of 14 books. So when you look at a standard Bible, the King James Bible, they leave out some of the books, and you wonder why. It's because they don't believe that they're God's word, that's why. But nonetheless, there is a lot of very interesting stuff in those books, which are actually included in the Catholic Bible, and I think in the Orthodox. So, if you're an Anglican, you're missing out on some interesting texts. And these extra books fill in the gap in the Bible narrative between the Babylonian captivity and the start of the New Testament with the birth of Jesus. Yes, it got all of the Greek period of history put in there. And the revived kingdom in Israel before the Romans came. You got all of that in there. But the one we're going to look at is the book of 2 Esdras, and it is ascribed to a 4th century priest and scribe called Ezra. And chapter 13 of 2 Esdras throws further light on what happened to the lost tribes. Yeah, where have they gone? What's happened? So he writes, those that were the 10 tribes carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Osir the king, whom Salmanassar, so that's the same as Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, that would be over the Euphrates, a very big wide river. And so came they into another land. So the other land would be Assyria and the places they were taken to. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. You know, bad boys when they're in their own land, but now they're going to, they're going to be good boys living by the Ten Commandments and the statutes. And they're going to find this other land that's nobody's been living there before, where they can live and pray and do good things, as God would want them to. So they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river. That's an odd term to use at first, isn't it? But Filmer again explains what a lot of this is about. He identifies the gorges, that's the passages, the narrow passages, with the upper reaches of the Euphrates. So they've been down in Gozan, there was a tributary leading to the Euphrates from Gozan, and you can go up the Euphrates. They were also in Haran, which is not that far from the Euphrates. You go up that river valley, and you come to these gorges. And this area today, where the gorges were, there are great lakes caused by the flooding of canyons behind the dams that the Turks have built on the Euphrates, especially the Ataturk Dam. I think that was built in the 1980s, around then. And in ancient times, it would have been possible for the people of Israel to escape northwards by following the river's gorges. They would have been able to link with the other Gamera on the Black Sea coast. So you can see you've got the Euphrates going up there, and if you follow up the Euphrates, you go through the gorges at Carmagina, and you come up, and you can get up to join with the other ones, the big arrow showing the Chimerians coming up and raiding Gordian in 695 BC. So you can see that in 710, to 610 BC, that's when he's sort of putting the Chimerian migration. But you can see that the other bunch of Chimerians could come straight up there, following the Euphrates, and join forces. The same people, aren't they? So in ancient times, it would have been possible for the people of Israel to escape northwards by following the river's gorges. They would have been able to link with the other Gamera on the Black Sea coast. Now then, we're going to look at another piece of evidence, a very important piece of evidence for the identification of the Gamera and also the Scythians. Who were these people? What did the Persians have to say about them? Because the Persian Empire, Babylonian Empire didn't last all that long. Persian Empire is going to be a much longer lasting thing, right up until the time of Alexander the Great, when he sacked it, the Achaemenian Empire. The Persians learned a lot from the Assyrians, particularly in terms of art, and favoured reliefs celebrating their victories. You can see one here. This is at Behistun. I think this is where the tombs of the Achaemenian kings were. And they put these big reliefs carved on the cliff face there. Wonderful work. I'd love to go and see that if I've had a chance. And you can see the people chained up there, standing there. The conquered masses. You've got their god as the flying force, Ahura Mazda of the Persians. He's taken the place of Ashur, of the Assyrians, of the great god flying up there. And then you see the great king there, and he's surveying all that he's conquered. But what's important about this is that at Houston, near the capital Persepolis, there are reliefs with trilingual inscriptions that say the same thing in 3 different languages. Elamite, which is Old Persian. Elam is an old name for Persia. Susian, Persians had a new kingdom with a capital of Susa, so that's the new Persians, and Babylonian. And these inscriptions have acted as a Rosetta Stone for deciphering Old Persian and Babylonian scripts. So this is a very important place for the decipherment of these old scripts, and Babylonian scripts particularly could then be used to help decipher Assyrian scripts, because they use the same basic language and same cuneiform scripts as the Assyrians did. So that's why this is a Rosetta Stone for interpreting these things. In particular, they confirm that a people referred to as the Saka or Sake in Persian versions are called Gimri in the Babylonian version. So this makes the connection between the Saka or Sake, who become the Scythians or the Saxons later on, known to the Persians. They knew all about Saka and the Sake, and they understand that Gimri are the same people. So the Cimmerians, who are the Gimri, are actually the same people as the Saka or Sake. There was little difference between New Kingdom Babylonian and Assyrian, both being written with the same cuneiform script. The Syrian records make it clear that the Gamera, or Gumri, are one and the same as the Bit Umri, a house of Omri, i.e. the Israelites. It therefore follows that the lost tribes were also the ancestors of Sake or Scythians, Scuti, and the Cimmerians, the Cymri or Kimri or Gumri, and the Scuti were really the same peoples. So that's a bit of an eye-opener, isn't it? We'll talk more in the next episode about the Sake and the derivations of their name and what that's all about. We'll follow onwards with the migrations of the Cimmeri or the Gimri and the Sake, and how they then went to a promised land, which is spoken of actually in the second book of Esdras, just after the bit I read out to you. They were going to find a promised land called Alzareth, where they would be able to practice their religion away from the multitude of horrific peoples like Assyrians. And they'd be able to go there and start a new culture. So that's all for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please do comment, do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe consider becoming a member of the college, because there's so much information I'm sharing with people, and college members do get certain privileges, and I do newsletters for them and occasional other videos that you won't see if you're just on the public channel. So thank you very much for your time. You can find me on patreon.com/Adrian G. Gilbert. I think that's right. And I look forward to speaking to you another time. Bye-bye.